Welcome to the first face-to-face meeting we've had for the Scrutiny Board for some time. I've not counted the number of meetings that we've met virtually or whatever, so I'm not going to try and pretend that I have, but it's nice to see people back again. We have all seen each other at council. Whether it will be as bad-tempered as council can be, I don't know, but we'll see what happens as the day goes on. So, welcome. Let's go through the items we've got. Now, for those members of the public who are watching in, our cameras aren't working properly. So there is a shot which has got everybody in it, but when you're speaking individually, there is no individual camera shot of you, and the officers who are sitting at the top end, it's going to be very difficult to know who it is that's actually speaking in terms of the public. So that said, let's go through item. If you just go through the first few items.
So agenda item 1, there's no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no exempt items. Agenda item 3, there's no formal late items today. Agenda item 4, if I can ask members to declare any interest. Agenda item 5, apologies have been received from councillors Blackburn, Dobson, Finnegan, Howley and Midgley. Councillor Bentley is supposed to be substituting for Councillor Howley, but I believe he may not be attending today.
Okay, right, thank you. Now, we've also formally in the pre-meeting, we have raised concerns that at least one member today hasn't been able to come along because they've attended site visits, which are taking place at the same time. So we'll try and get that sorted out, because there are two potential conflicts for us coming up later on this year. So hopefully that will be resolved so that members are able to go to the site visits and also to be able to attend scrutiny as well, rather than having to make a choice as to which one they do or do not attend. And there are people like Councillor Brooks who do often substitute for other people on some of these scrutiny some of these plans panels. So we need to make sure that everyone has the flexibility to do what is right for the council as a whole. So if we now move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the minutes. So can I have your formal approval of the minutes of the 25th of March? Yep, they've been formally approved. And then we've got the summary note of the 15th of July. Is that formally approved as well? Good. Okay. Item 7, Safer, Stronger Community City Plan. We had a presentation on this at our last virtual meeting, and anybody who had any comments was asked to submit them. We didn't have any comments. Simon, has anything further changed? Has anybody approved it? Because I know it's been to the Safer Leeds board. So can you just give us a brief update on what's happened since we last met?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Simon Hodgson, Head of Service at Safer Stronger Communities team. So yes, there's no further updates. I've had quite a lot of support from members in terms of the actually new city plan for the Safer Stronger Communities team. What has happened is the directors agreed to release the documents for public consultation. So that will be happening over the next couple of weeks. The closing date being the 26th of October. So today really it's more of a formal procedure to approve, so we can go to the next stage following any feedback from the public, any adjustments that will then go on to the executive boards. The only other point I'd like to raise, Chair, is obviously members around the room will be aware that the Mayor is currently consulting on the West Yorkshire-wide police and crime plan. So there will be a link between that and the local place-based Safer Stronger Communities plan. Thank you.
That's fine, thank you. Yeah, that was a point that I was asked to attend on behalf of Councillor Amanda Carter to the Police and Crime panel. And that was a question I asked, is does our plan inform the Mayor's, or is the Mayor's plan meant to inform ours? And the answer I got back is hopefully they will start to be aligned better, but we do have councillor, it's long since been a councillor. We do have the Deputy Mayor, Alison Lowe, is coming to, I think it's our November meeting, so that she can hear our views on policing in general, and that's going to be fed back in to the West Yorkshire Mayor's plans as well. So that said, is anybody any questions that they want to ask Simon, or are we happy to formally approve?
Thank you. Very happy to formally approve. I just, out of interest, and a new member to this board, would be interested to know about if we are getting any further information on the sex work governance arrangements noted on page 29 at any point in the future work programme.
Simon?
Yeah, I assume that's on your work programme moving forward, and obviously we'll feed back in terms of the governance and the plans. And I know there's a couple of members involved in that, in actually having the working groups, so we can put that as part of your forward plan.
Okay, thank you. Right, so can we formally approve this? Yes, okay, so that's fine. Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Right, now what we'll do is we will, bearing in mind that the cameras won't move around the room, but if we can all introduce ourselves as to who we all are now, we can then move on to the next agenda items. I'm Councillor Barry Anderson. I chair the Scrutiny Board.
Natasha Prosser, Clerk to the Scrutiny Board.
Councillor Pauline Graham, Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
And Councillor Rebecca Charwood, now in the Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Angela Gabriel, Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Kevin Ritchie, Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Denise Reagan, Bermondsofts and Richmond Hill Ward.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Andrew Scopes. I'm here as a guest to talk to item 9 on the joint inquiry. Thank you.
Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Javid Akhtar, Little London and Woodhouse.
Sue Duckworth from Entertainment Licensing.
Mandy Snaith, Head of Catering and Fleet.
John Woolmer, Acting Chief Officer for Environmental Services.
Councillor Trish Smith, Pudsey Ward.
Councillor Dawn Collins, Horsforth Ward.
Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, we've got the Gambling Act Statement of Licensing Policy before us for our review and to whether or not we're willing to sign it off. This has been taken out to public consultation. It's also been passed through the licensing committee as well. It was before executive board yesterday, and they've passed it to us to formally accept what's happening. So, Sue, is there anything you want to bring to the attention of members? You don't have to have something if you've not, but if you want to just explain anything you want to bring to our attention.
Just very quickly, it went out to public consultation. We wrote to 427 people advising them of the consultation, offering them a copy of the policy. We had 12 responses requesting a copy of the policy, and then just one formal response to the consultation, which is at Appendix 3, and our response is at Appendix 4 to that. They made a couple of valid points, and we went back and clarified a few others. But other than that, it hasn't made a substantial change to the policy that went out to consultation. It's now in front of you, and then if you would like to make comment back to exec board, it will then go through to full council in November. Thank you.
So does anybody get any comments you would like to make about the gambling policy? We will be clarifying a point that's in, not something that needs to be formally raised. Yeah, Councillor Ritchie.
I've just got a question, if I may, on what you just said. You said, I think you wrote to 412 did you say interested parties, but I just wondered who they were. Not everyone, obviously, but generally who they were. why they were selected? Thank you.
So we are required to consult with certain people and that's in the Gambling Act. So that would be business owners, residents, and people that represent them. So we wrote to 427 people, and those were every person that holds a gambling license in the city, all support groups, all ward members, our MPs. We wrote to public health, all the responsible authorities, basically everybody that I've got a contact for, or as a department we have a contact for that might vaguely be interested in gambling. That's who we sent it to.
Okay, follow up, yeah.
Just to be clear, you said residents. Now, obviously, we're residents as well as other things, but you don't write specifically to residents, do you?
No, we expect that our ward members will represent their residents, and then that covers that side of it. We also advertise the consultation publicly, so members of the public are welcome to make comment. I have to say we've never had a comment from a member of the public.
Okay,
thank you. I just wanted to clarify that because it's important. If some residents are written to, why not all, which isn't really feasible, but I just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Anybody get any other points they would like to make on this? In that case, can we formally release this to go to full council? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming along. Thank you. So we now move on to the substantive item today, which is an inquiry into waste services. Some time ago, this board carried out another inquiry into waste services, and this moves things further along in terms of what's going to happen. Councillor Scopes and I met some months ago to discuss how this could be done on a cross scrutiny board basis, in terms of Councillor Scopes looking at the financing and the resource allocation side of things, and this scrutiny board looking at what the service is delivering and whether it's meeting the needs of the public. And so as a result of that, Councillor Scopes and myself, along with officers, met with Mr. Woolmer and Mr. Rogers to outline what we were planning to do. And there was general agreement that this is something that can be worked on. This scrutiny inquiry is to look forward in terms of what we need to do to improve our performance, also to look forward as to whether or not the service can meet the new demands in terms of the volumes that are coming forward and the different ways that people are operating their lives nowadays in terms of being at home more, online purchasing and various other change of habits that people have got, and whether or not the service is able to respond to the needs. And also the importance of climate change in terms of, as a council, we declared the climate emergency and we said we would get things done. And there is no doubt that the waste collection service has a valuable role to play to make sure that when because at the moment, if we go on the principle that we're building 3,000 to 4,000 houses, that means every 3 years we're almost building a new ward, which has got to be taken into consideration. Plus other people, houses that weren't in use are now coming back into use as well. So there's a number of problems coming forward. So you've got before you the suggested terms of reference. Now, I asked Mr. Woolmer if he wanted to just update us on what's happening in the world in general, because when we last did this, we were promised that the government were going to have a strategy that was going to be coming out, and to date, we've not seen it yet. So, Mr. Woolmer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, but probably reasonably briefly, where we are at the moment with the waste strategy for Leeds is that, as you correctly say, Chair, we're to a large degree waiting on the results of the current consultation taking place by government through DEFRA. We are pretty hopeful that will be concluded quite soon. The noises coming from DEFRA and government are quite positive on that. And just to be really clear, the 2 or 3 relevant parts of that will have a massive effect on the inquiry and the options that are taken forward over the next months and years in Leeds will be primarily around their 2 strands of their developing policy around having to deal with getting some consistency of approach across the country in terms of how waste is managed and particularly recyclable material is managed. And then building on that, therefore, what is the consistency that the government through DEFRA will require councils to take? And the emerging biggies from that really are around food and glass. And they're the 2 items that in Leeds at the moment we don't collect separately from the curbside. So obviously that would have a big implication on us in Leeds. So we're really waiting for that consultation to happen. In terms of crystal balling, it was a similar place to really where we were before when we've last discussed this, that we and the government are still talking about a legal requirement to collect food from curbsides from whatever year that then is implemented from, perhaps 2 or 3 years' time. We'll see if that alters because the government's own timetable obviously has been delayed 18 months or so. And the current consultation is around that. And again, it's difficult for us at the moment to foresee exactly what councils will be allowed to do with that. So just to give you an example on that, there are some councils in the country at the moment that successfully collect their food waste with their garden waste, call it commingling. So they have their equivalent of brown bin. It might be a different colour, but it's usually brown bin or green bin, confusingly for us. They put their food in with their garden waste successfully. So Hull, East Riding, Cheshire, for example, already do that. And that gets taken away and processed and turned into composting material. There is emerging models around that also look at turning that into as well, capturing some of the gas that's released on that and using that through similar to an anaerobic digester concept. So you get a bit of both going on. And clearly there are also councils across the country that collect the food separately and just take that purely to an anaerobic digester. So we're waiting really to see from DEFRA what will be allowed in that. So in their initial consultation, they talked around some restrictions and they weren't very keen on commingling as the preference. And they also talked about a requirement for being a weekly collection. So we just need to understand really what the government will allow as exceptions to that. There's something called TEEP, which stands for, no, I always forget this, technically, environmentally and economically practical. And that currently applies to everything we do now. So that's why you get a discrepancy and a variation of how councils collect things, because they can say to DEFRA, well, actually, it's better for us if we collect it in this way because we've got a company we can take it to that separate in this way. So that's why in some places you get glass collected, some places you don't, for example. And you can apply for that TEEP sort of discretion from government already. What seems to be being said is that they're going to be a bit more strict on that TEEP application. So we don't know how strict they would be, for example, on what I've just talked about around food. Would they allow food to be collected commingled? Potentially, yes. Tick, we get TEEP approval for that. But would they allow us then to collect it fortnightly rather than weekly, as we currently collect garden waste now, and as indeed the commingled material in other parts of the country is collected now, as indeed we collect food now in the black bins weekly, fortnightly. So that's where we still are with those things. We are hoping that we'll get, not just as obviously everyone around the country will get some updates on that soon, and the noises coming out of that are reasonably positive. The second element is around glass that will have an effect on what we do, and therefore our strategy and how we design our services, and why we're kind of at a pause with things at the moment. Is again bearing in mind that one of the major points of the government is to ensure consistency. So we don't want to go and do something because they're saying, hold on, we need some consistency here. And again, this is something that probably hasn't become much clearer yet. I can crystal ball again for you a little bit, but the government's talking around, again, a legal requirement to collect glass from the curbside, or at least make that offer. but it doesn't with glass specify how frequently. So that could be fortnightly, monthly even. But it also still talks about a deposit return scheme as a major way of dealing with glass. And we've raised this issue before, that there's a bit of a tension or a contradiction there in that if the deposit return scheme becomes the rolled out successful model, which in a lot of ways I think we probably all would like it to be, because that really does incentivize people to then take their glass back, to get their 10, 20p or however it's worked in terms of the logistics of a scheme. And it really incentivizes people to take the glass back and make sure it's reused. But if that is successfully rolled out, then there wouldn't be the glass to collect from the curbside. And if there was, people would be going around emptying the bins and taking the glass and getting the 10, 20p's for them. So there's a little bit of confusion there around what the two are. Now, if I was crystal ball gazing, I'd probably put my money on the deposit return scheme, probably moving to one side, and then the government focusing more on the curbside collection of glass. But again, we don't want to back that horse at this stage, because we could end up investing lots of money, which we don't have anyway, around that type of collection scheme, when actually in 2 or 3 years' time, there's no glass, very little glass to collect. And actually, you might find councils then saying, well, a better way to collect it is do some sort of bottle bank scheme with deposit returns attached to it. So that's kind of a shortened version of where we are with things. So the final point to add in is a really important point, sorry, to add to all of that, is a critical part of the government's strategy and national waste resource strategy is the resource bit of it as well. And they've been really clear all along that they will fund all new activities that councils have to undertake to meet their new legal requirements, both infrastructural costs and running costs. But clearly, that has a massive impact on our modelling, what we do, what's actually really going to be sustainable and achievable. And a massive issue for the country, not just for Leeds and regionally, is the infrastructure, therefore, to underpin all this. You know, it's okay if we end up, even if we could get the resources and build yet another new depot, perhaps to accommodate all the extra glass collections and food collections, or whether we're allowed to commingle, whatever, we've still got to have the places to take these things to process them in the capacity we need them processed. And at a time when every other council in the country will be looking to do that at the same time and requiring new fleet at the same time. So there are a lot of other issues, I think, still to work through in terms of the logistics of implementing strategies, not just for us, but across the country. But again, that's not just a Leeds issue. And the issue will be different, because different cities, as we know, and as you've discussed before, and it's part of the terms of the proposed terms of reference, are at different stages. I could talk about some of the positives around what we do in terms of the stuff we do successfully collect and separate, and therefore get good markets for and recycle well. But clearly, there is other elements that we don't collect. You know, we don't collect glass from the curbside. We don't collect food from the curbside. So, you know, all councils in different positions. Hence the government sort of wanting to get a consistency there. I'll stop there, Chair. That's been helpful.
Thank you. Right, before we go on to questions, Councillor Feek, do you want to introduce yourself now? The problem we've got is the same one as you had at exec board yesterday. The cameras aren't working, so people don't know where everybody's sitting. So,
okay, thanks, Chair. Apologies for the slight delay in coming in. As you said, it's Councillor Mohammed Rafiq. I'm the exec board member for Environment and Housing.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Charlwood.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and thank you for that. Just in the future, and the green issues that we were talking about, climate change, there is technology out there that's being developed currently and being sort of funded and, you know, burgeoning in the world that can or promises to convert household waste into jet fuel for aeroplanes and sustainable aviation fuel. So that is quite an exciting option potentially in the future. So just whether you had that on your horizon, or whether you could imagine moving some of our waste into that sort of, and be good if we were an early adopter of that sort of initiative. Just some thoughts on that.
To the Chair, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Charlwood. Our view at the moment would be we need to understand what it is we're required to do and what we're going to get money to do, and we need to go then out to the market for options like that. So the marketplace will be the place that will determine the infrastructure of who can provide that kind of technology, and that's our current way of that we would deal with the waste that we then collect. So yeah, that could be one of the options that come forward from the marketplace. But again, it would be around the cost involved in that, and would that be somewhere we would take some of our waste to, but then some of our waste would go to another place for more traditional, if I can call it that, recycling of those materials. But certainly, yeah, that's something that seems to be emerging as an opportunity. But it also requires, of course, therefore, a facility to be developed somewhere, land to be available, and all those sort of issues. But yeah, our view is that we need to firm up what it is that we can collect in Leeds. So we need to be clear from when, what tonnages and what material are we going to collect in what way. So do we propose to have some sort of co-mingling? Could we separate it out? What kind of tonnages would Leeds produce and when would start producing? And then we can have the discussions with the companies that then would provide the infrastructure, run the infrastructure and convert the material in the way you suggested, to say, right, this is what we could do for you in Leeds, this is where it would go, this is how much, to be brutal, it would cost you to come to us to do that. And that will also link as well to understanding better what the government's proposal will be about how they would reimburse us. So again, what the devil will be in the detail in that of will they have a scheme where they basically grant fund councils based on an amount per household that they judge as an amount that it should cost to collect and process food. And then if it costs you more because we convert it into aviation fuel, and that maybe would cost more than converting it into AD or to compost material, then would we have to make up the difference, or would the market come to us and say, actually, it will cost you less because we can, yeah. But so yeah, they are actually, that's one of the key sort of types of questions that is the next thing to look at, and I think I welcome the inquiry in that regard to be able to look and together at those types of things and options.
Okay, now Councillor Scopes, you want to outline what you see your role in your scrutiny board and what you're precisely going to be looking into?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Anderson. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for your cooperation on this agenda. And for those watching, the point of a joint inquiry is to bring out additional focus. And I think in a lot of items in council business, it is cross directorate, and resources clearly impacts on everything we do. And we've just heard from John very clearly, there's a lot of challenges, a lot to think through, a lot of pros and cons to weigh up. And I'm hoping through this inquiry that we will come out with a real clear idea of what's best for Leeds, whether it's aviation fuel or whether it's on curb glass recycling. And I guess one of the things I'm also keen to understand is, in the context of councils having very limited resources at this point in time, is are we getting the most bang for our buck in terms of the climate impact? Are we reducing our impact as a city on the climate in line with the climate emergency we all voted in favour of declaring? So I think that's a really important point. I won't go through the paper in detail because members will have seen it and read it. But ultimately, one of the things I think is sort of probably more in the Strategy and Resources Directorate, and therefore screening board that I chair, is around some of the contracts and how those fit together. But the details set out in the report. But I think the idea of this is, if we work together, we'll have a better, more thorough inquiry and hopefully have a better outcome for Leeds as a whole.
Thank you. Councillor Smith and then Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It was very, very well written and presented. Got a couple of questions. So on point 6.1, which is on page 125 of our papers, number 5 of yours possibly, it says that you'd like you're going to do a breakdown of the city's waste in terms of volume in comparison to other local authorities. I'd like to see that as a percentage, please, not a tonnage specifically, because obviously the size of the authority varies so greatly that I think that would make more sense. looking forward, local recycling, would it be worth putting some cardboard recycling points at bottle bank points around the city? That would reduce a lot of the home delivery packaging that possibly sees its way into green bins currently. I know that's kind of fairly short term in terms of if we do move on to curbside glass recycling, but I do see that as possibly some way in the future. So it could be a an option for now that would possibly help with your over presentation at the moment. My other point, I think, is during your presentation, you mentioned that possibly food collection would be in tandem with garden waste collection. Now, garden waste collection obviously stops for certain months of the year. So what would your plan be sort of for that moving forward? Thank you.
Yes, on you go, John.
Thanks to the chair. Yeah, thank you for those questions, councillor. Yeah, starting at the last point first in terms of the commingled option, because just to be clear, that I'm just suggesting that is one option. It's not something that necessarily we would do, but at the moment it would seem the most sensible option for Leeds, because we have the largest garden waste collection service in the UK. Over 220,000 households every 2 weeks we collect from. So we've got the infrastructure there that's actually unparalleled within the UK. So why wouldn't we look at that infrastructure as a starting point? But there are pros and cons to that, and it's not the co-mingling of garden waste and food waste is a slightly lesser. What's the word? It doesn't get as good carbon reduction sort of results, I suppose, because we're not capturing as much of the gas as we probably could have otherwise. But so again, that's part of the options for me. We do need to look at. And so the question you specifically asked about that was,
what would your sorry,
on you go.
What would your, if we went with that, what would your plans be through the winter months when there was no garden collection?
Yeah.
Because obviously I know that the drivers of the garden waste vehicles are obviously then sort of moved around and do other things, aren't they?
So yeah, so I lost my train of thought then. Yeah, exactly, that's what we would look at. So the options, so for example, where the commingling currently happens in Cheshire, I think the outer Manchester area, Hull and East Riding, that already happens. So we would have to look at the service being all year round, which has a benefit as well, because it means that those that do have some garden material, I know some members around the table have asked that and before, would potentially have their garden waste collected as well all year round. But it would probably mean that in those winter months you wouldn't require as many of the crews, because even with the food added to it, it probably wouldn't still have as much tonnage. But yes, we would need to collect all year round, certainly. Then just moving back to the first couple of questions, probably wrap them up together a little bit, really. I think what we probably need to add to one of the things to come back to you early on is a statement of what we currently do in terms of recycling, sort of a position statement. And that would bring in, so for example, we do already offer some additional cardboard collections by glass bins. So it's about members understanding what we do and what the options for those might be. I think in Otley we did it, for example, but we may have removed the Otley one because it caused some problems. I can't remember exactly with that. And we like with everything, it's about you knowing as members what the options are, you know, with bottle banks, with other collecting banks, and because it wasn't that long ago that members probably came to us more to say they wanted them moving, to be honest, because they were a problem, whereas hopefully the tide's turned a little bit now and actually people want them more because it's obviously better for the planet. So yeah, so I think we need to come back, Chair, with as part of the first sort of baseline of, well, what do we actually already offer and what are the pros and cons of that? So I'll pick that up in that. Does that cover all the questions? Oh yeah, we'll cover that, yeah.
Okay, I've got Councillor Collins, then Councillor Brooks, then Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, actually. The first two are about the roof. Could you just confirm, does all our black bin waste go to the roof still? And the second part of that is, do they give you any sort of report as to what the waste is? Because I'm just curious as to what percentage of the waste that they receive is glass, because we don't want to change the system if we find that what's going to the roof, there's quite a low percentage of glass, and the system we have at the moment is already working. So, and then the second thing is, I know we're not looking backwards, but from the reports we've had regarding missed bins in the past, there are obviously some streets missing from the databases that you have, because those streets that miss don't come through on the reports. So how are we looking to update the databases to make sure every household is included on those? So yeah, 2 questions on the roof and one on the database we use.
Okay, to come back on the roof, sorry, Veolia, who run the roof for the council, do what's called a composition analysis regularly, but it is not a particularly, it's quite high level composition analysis, and I need to go back and look at that in terms of what materials they identify and the accuracy that we believe that is. But we do that, and we can provide that. And again, I can provide that if you want as part of the baseline information. What we would want to do is a more detailed composition analysis. It was done a few years ago, when literally you'd take a number of bin wagons worth of material and you literally dump it somewhere, and you get someone to sort it through by hand and properly work out an exact percentage. It depends on the load you take, and you try and make them representative of the city, etc. But it's a worthwhile thing for someone to do, to pay someone to do. I hesitate to say, I don't think I'd want to do that job, but we will certainly be doing. Yeah. But that we need to do that as part of informing, as you say, the strategies that to make sure that, for exactly the reason you said. Again, my gut feeling is it will show that there is a lot of glass still in the black bins, but at least it shows the baseline, and then we can always do that again once we've implemented the glass collections, if we do, and then say, well, is there still glass in the bins? But yeah, we do that, and so I can get the sort of high level analysis. And then I've forgotten the first part of the question.
It was to update our database, because the streets that get missed in my ward that are never reported as being missed. So I'm assuming your database doesn't have those households on there.
Yeah, we've obviously had discussions about this in the past, and I think the truth is there's a variety of reasons why that happens, where misses aren't recorded, and I think rarely will it actually be about the fact that the road itself isn't on the database. It'll be the fact that perhaps the database doesn't realise that there is a brown bins on that road, for example. So as part of the route review that we're doing, and we're going to restart hopefully very soon in October, that whole redesign of all the collection routes across the city will pick all that up. So we'll look again at all the roads that exist that are on the database of the councils across the city, and then we'll redesign the route collections across the whole city for black and green bins, and that should pick up any roads that for some reason, if they are not on our current collection routes. But as part of that process, and one of the reasons we suspended it over the pandemic period, was it's really crucial we involve crews in that discussion from the start and at the end, but also members. And what we'll make sure is that as part of that, as we did with the garden routes, we'll be meeting with yourselves and certainly sending you maps, etc., of the routes and proposed collection days towards the end of the work. So again, that's another way that you can pick up on local anomalies. But I'm confident that's the way that it'll pick up all the misses. But
yeah,
I just want to make a statement really that the bins I'm talking about, I've emailed refuse services about the last couple of days. They are black bins though, and they've been missed several times in succession. So that's why I'm just a bit concerned that it's a database issue rather than anything else.
I'll perhaps if we speak outside the meeting, so I can just get the specific examples to reassure myself whether that's not.
I'm trying to tread a very thin line here, that there are concerns. I mean, for example, there's no councillor here from Armley, but Armley is actually one of the worst wards in the city in terms of missed bins, based on the information I've been given. So I'm trying not to go down and have a debate about it. We are going to have a separate session, but there are issues that some streets just don't seem to be on. I've reported some in my ward, and they tend to be new houses. They tend to be new houses that planning haven't yet got round to agreeing, and also the delivery of brown bins. The residents have got the gardens. They've got, if they go on the app and they think they've done their postcode, and it shows that they're going to get a collection, but they've not got any brown bins delivered to them yet because they're sitting in the site office. That's where, so it's not that the council haven't done their part, it's the developer hasn't passed it out. So we are going to hold a separate session. I'm suggesting we'll hold a separate session where we do look backwards, but 99% of what we're about to undertake, hopefully, is looking forward as to how we can improve what we're doing. So yeah, I take the point that Councillor Collins is making, because again, we can all probably have got examples in our own areas of where that's happening. So that said, I've now got Councillor Brooks and Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to go back to the potential for the brown bin collections having food waste in. I've got a few questions around that. So in areas where there's no existing brown bin infrastructure, like what percentage of the city aren't covered with brown bin infrastructure? Because that's obviously going to be a big push. How would we deal with well, no, this is a two-part question. So in the city centre, some buildings, the waste is dealt with by private contractors rather than by the council. And I mean, this is a bit crystal bally, but would the government extend like the requirement to those properties for the council to have to sort out as well for that? Because like keeping in mind that a lot of those buildings were designed way before there was a requirement for any sort of recycling. So in a lot of buildings, it's just not the space to have additional, like even a green bin, let alone an additional brown bin. And then I think that might be it.
Thanks. Okay, John.
Yeah, it's just about the sort of gaps and like what we can do about especially high density areas, not just like blocks of flats, but also like, you know, back-to-back houses where, yeah, thank you.
Okay, again through the chair. Thank you, Councillor, for those questions. Yeah, again, just to be really clear, we aren't actively at the moment developing a strategy around commingled bins, but it's something that we're looking at together with other options, and it depends what the government's requirements will be and what the letters do. But like as I say, my feeling is that's the most likely way that we'd probably want to go because of the existing infrastructure that's there. So if we did go in that direction in terms of the commingled options, you're right, what we currently do is cover about 2/3 of the city through brown bins. So there's roughly 60,000 households in the city, and I think we collect from about 220,000 brown bins. So there will be 1/3 of the city that don't have a brown bin that we'd have to find a solution for. So that would be part of what we'd have to build up in terms of whatever solution we did bring forward. You're absolutely right, that therefore needs addressing. So whether we would look at where that's already done in places like Hull, East Riding, etc., and what they've done, there could be some easy enough solutions to bring that 1/3 gap down, because there could be a number of houses that probably could get a brown bin and would want one if they know that they're going to have the food collected, even though they've got a relatively small garden. We could look at smaller size brown bins for some properties that are just predominantly able to just have food. And then that would probably leave another gap then of whatever it would be, how many tens of thousands of houses that there needs to be another solution for, or we can't find a solution for. But that would be the case whether it's a brown bin commingled or not. Whatever solution we come forward with, we'd have to look at caddies or some form of bin collection anyway. So it's whether we have two forms of solution. But that's exactly the detail we need to work through, and we'll present through this inquiry in terms of the options and the pros and the cons, and look at how it's done at other councils and what works, doesn't work. In terms of city centre, yeah, it's not all entirely private contractors. We do collect a different amount as well, but it's a really good point, and part of the government strategy they're consulting on does highlight the issue of they would class it as high rise, dense housing, densely populated housing, and really it doesn't really offer solutions to that. It raises that question that you've raised, really. What the consultation is, well, what we'd welcome solutions around that. So there isn't an answer directly to your question at the moment, but again, that's something we would seek an answer and some clarity, and hope that comes through from the consultation, national consultation, around what exactly, because that'll be an issue in the heart of London, for example, won't it, in a lot of the London areas, as well as other big cities particularly. It'll be an issue that's not just unique to Leeds in terms of what is going to be legally required. I suspect that they may relax the legal requirement for those types of properties and almost declare them TEEP themselves. So to say that actually that you don't have to come forward with solutions for those properties that would just support you if you did. But that again is me crystal balling again. I think the detail we need to know, and all councils across the country really need to know. But it is a massive issue in Leeds, and it's not just in Leeds around the high rise. As you quite rightly mentioned, it's around the densely populated areas, where Leeds is pretty unique in terms of the amount of terrace housing we have across the city, with no drives and very little front or back gardens or yards in a lot of instances. So the obvious areas, Headingley, Hyde Park, Woodhouse, Hare Hills, the obvious ones that come to mind in terms of massive areas of densely populated housing that are a struggle for us now to get to in terms of collecting. But if you add an extra item such as food or glass into that mix to collect from areas like that, it does pose an even greater challenge, I'll put it like that. But that's part of what we need to do in terms of coming up with solutions. I suggest probably what we will end up doing is the low-hanging fruit first. Let's get something going. Let's use the infrastructure we have. Let's get it to a majority of the city. But looking at what we will do in future for the rest of the city. But again, those are the issues we need to discuss and be clear with you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Councillor Rafiq.
John's covered most of that, but this is a very pertinent point, you know, when it comes to co-mingling, Chair. I think we are kind of on the very much on the front seat if we go down that route, or if the government goes down that route, given we are the biggest actually when it comes to garden waste collection, because it's free. We actually collect 210,000. The biggest authority in the country only have 50,000 a week garden waste collection. So we have got the 2/3 of the properties have got brown bins. So I think we'll be a kind of, if the government goes down that, we will be on the very much on the front seat to kind of to do that. Unlike many of the local authorities, we'll have to kind of roll all that out. But yeah, it will be. I mean, whether we have a weekly food waste collection or co-mingling, I think it does present a challenge. It's a very valid point for some of our inner city areas where people haven't got gardens. Where do you actually, or the city centre, or the high rises, then where do you put the additional bins? You know, it's a challenge, and that's something I think together we need to find the solutions for, and say, and it may be that we start somewhere and then kind of expand to other areas, and as we find solutions.
Thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Ritchie, then Councillor Gabriel.
Thanks, Chair. It sounds like we might have started the inquiry already. Just to bring it
Yeah,
back
I've got others as well,
to
yeah.
the terms of reference, you made it clear that it's about looking forward and not back, and certainly John's and Councillor Scopes have give us some clear steers of what we might be discussing in the future. But just to help that process, I think it'd be worth, if possible, circulating the previous reports that have been mentioned to see what areas were covered, whether it's the mist bins, things like side waste, I'm sure have been explored
Yes.
before, so that we know exactly what we're not looking over again, and what we've heard what we are going to be looking forward.
Yep. No, that's good point. Right, Councillor Gabriel, then Councillor Collins, then Councillor Charwood, then Councillor Akhtar.
Yeah, mine was about to, I thought this agenda item was a terms of reference for the meeting that we're going to have where 2 delegates go away. And then we've already booked in a private subgroup. So are we going to just go through it all again and again
Well,
and
no,
again?
it's just to make sure that the terms of reference are correct and that there's nothing should be added into the terms of reference or any areas. Because, for example, one of the questions I've got is, have we got anybody at DEFRA who we could invite to any of these sessions so that we can try and get some clarity? So that was the type of...
And that is more a more appropriate question than some of the ones we've been hearing. That's what I was going to say.
But I mean,
because some of the debate today has actually been discussing the what we're going to discuss in the future, rather than actually saying these are the terms of reference and this is what we want to see in the terms of reference. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Right. So I've got Councillor Collins, then Councillor Charwood, then Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Chair. And my question might be one for the future as well, but if we do go down the road of doing garden waste, would you be able to put the garden waste in a plastic bag before putting it in the bin? Because I'm just mindful that if you tip a bin with food waste in, sorry, I meant food waste, it's stickier. It doesn't clear the bin quite as easily, and it's probably going to be smellier long term. You might not know yet, John, but that would be one of my initial concerns.
Chair, mindful of the previous comments from councillors, I think that is exactly the sort of detail to get into at the meetings themselves, and just to reassure you that they are exactly the sorts of questions that we will be able to talk through and have answers on, and that's why the scope of the inquiry is useful for us, certainly, to have that discussion with you as members, to understand what will be tolerated, if you like, in your areas and with residents, because that's kind of the discussion we've had previously, probably a few years ago on this, when we've raised it before, and there's that tension between everybody wants to recycle more and do the right thing, but nobody seems to want any more bins. In fact, everyone wants less bins. The utopia is we can all put it in one bin and it all magically gets recycled. So that's the kind of level of discussion we'd certainly welcome it through the inquiry.
Yep, that's fine. Councillor Charwood, then Councillor Akhtar.
Well, mine is then about terms of reference for the future. Could we make sure we consider or have some consideration about future workforce availability? I think the drivers has been an issue, and not going back, but these are, and obviously I think HGV drivers there's a big thing in the Times about lack of drivers for refuse vehicles nationally. So if that could be looked at, and then also in the terms of reference, if we could have a look at frequency of collections, because what are we gaining? We might lose something. What might that be? Might that be a monthly black bin collection, and whether we would like that or not? And then just in terms of my ward, we have most houses have gardens and driveways, but they're not very big, so we don't want necessarily to have 5 big wheelie bins in the driveway. I don't, so is that as well? Would like to look at that.
Yep, good point. Councillor Akhtar.
Chair, thank you, Chair. Also, if I can just add that in the future discussions should be on green bins. For example, some areas in the city are still lack of green bins at all, which obviously on one hand we're trying to promote the recycling, on the other hand we don't have the same facilities for those residents. And I can highlight some of the areas in my own ward. And with regards to the garden waste collection, there are areas with the huge gardens and some elderly members of the communities living on those estates, but unfortunately we don't have the same provision for collections of any brown bins in those areas. So I think for the future reference, I think these are the discussions we need to take, because if you are a single parent, or if you're quite old and fragile, and it's difficult for them to take those garden waste to the recycling centers, and especially over the last 18 months, what we have seen, Chair, with even though with our own recycling centers, people had to book online and et cetera, et cetera. So has been some issues. So if you can please take those two issues, green bins where it's needed in the city, and also the brown bins with the, we're not talking about the properties without any gardens. We're talking about the properties with the huge gardens in our council estate. So I think that needs to be considered.
Yep, but good points. Right, now, the issues that I just want clarification on, I'm not suggesting we go back to years and years ago when we had a West Yorkshire collection facility, but is there any, have you given any thought as to whether or not we could get economies of scale on, say, an anaerobic digester that was used by all West Yorkshire authorities? So in other words, if we do go down the route of food collection, we do need to have a plant somewhere. Have you ever had any discussions about that one? The next one is in 2005, just shows you how long I've been looking into the waste strategy. We went down to Doncaster. Now at Doncaster, their part of their waste collection was run by a third-party organisation, but they also collected waste separately into the sides of vehicles. So in other words, it was separated out and then it was put into little compartments in the side of. Is that model yesterday's model, if you see what I mean, and not something that you would suggest nowadays? So we'd start with that one, and I've got some other ones. But what about, agreeing a market for some of those products? Because that's going to be an issue, and also things like an anaerobic digester. Has any thought been done on that? And then the Doncaster model.
Thank you, Chair. There's been a limited discussion on the regional AD, but again, I can feed that into the main meetings when we come to those, what potential options there are. That is something that the government, I'm sure, would be pleased to see more of and support, because it ticks the box really in terms of the infrastructure a little bit easier. There are a lot of practical and logistical reasons why, from a service delivery perspective, that would be difficult or more difficult. Simply because where is it located? Yes. Everyone would want it located near them from a service delivery viewpoint, perhaps not if you live near it. But if there was a regional AD that was in the other side of Wakefield or Bradford, for example, that would add to the costs of transport and also our impact on our carbon footprint transport, although we are looking to get an electric fleet as soon as we can. That is a potential option, but my own view at the moment is the cons probably outweigh the pros at the moment, because Leeds in itself is a huge city, the second biggest outside London in terms of refuse collection and tonnages. So you would assume we would have the capacity to run our own, and then if other neighbouring councils or companies wanted to use it, perhaps they could, similar to the RRF. But we don't know yet is the answer to that, because we don't know what the marketplace is. But yes, that is one of the potential options. Yes, certainly.
That's fine.
The Doncaster model, as you referred to it from quite a while ago, that's something that I'm pretty sure we're talking about the same thing. It's the vehicle where you have a number of waste streams separated, collect, and they go in the presentation down the side. They're used extensively in Wales, for example, and tend to be used in councils that don't have the density and the city sort of conurbations that we have. And our sort of feedback from that is that there's mixed feedback on that, in terms of they are more expensive because the rounds that you do are less, because you can only collect less tonnage because they take more time to empty. There is the key issue then of residents, customers, that having to have a number of boxes. So again, you could only really introduce that in Leeds if we really, as collectively as members and officers, thought that Leeds residents would work with that. And there are some other issues potentially emerging, although we'd need to do some more work on this. But there are some concerns, again, about the longer term effects of collecting like that on health and safety and on staff, because it's quite a repetitive sort of bending down process to go, and whereas wheeling a bin out, pressing a button, letting it go in, still a hard job to do thousands of those each week, but it's a lot easier on the back and lifting, as you can imagine. So there are some rumblings around that as a longer term sort of issue. But yes, it does exist. There are places where we can find, we can feed that into the inquiry where that happens at the moment, and perhaps get some feedback from those areas.
How are we going to include planning in this so that when houses are being designed, that they're building it with refuse collection? Because even go on to most modern estates and they've not got the space to put all these bins out. So that's even ones that were built, say, in the last year or two, they don't all have space. So how are we going to work with planning so that planning is part of the design process of these estates? Because again, I've seen some descriptions of where you would actually have a skip that effectively goes into the ground and you tube it into a place. You then come along and pull it back out again and then replace it. Now, I'm not suggesting, but that's the type of model that's being looked at. How do we incorporate planning into this? Because they are a vital service in terms of getting it right, because otherwise we're going to be in the same problem we've got just now. We need to retrofit something that's being done just now because we're changing our policies in a year or two's time. So how do we incorporate planning?
Again, Chair, I can feed that into the actual inquiry itself and bring those sort of information back to yourselves. That is something, for example, we are looking at the feasibility of that on a particular contacted us and asked around the kind of suggestion that you just said. But again, there are pros and cons around that type of system, both in terms of residents accepting that they won't have a bin in the future and they've got to walk potentially quite a distance to dispose of the waste every time they need to throw something out. But that could work better on new estates because the principle would be, well, you bought the house knowing that was the way that you get rid of the waste, so you can't complain they don't have a bin. So it would be easy to introduce on new estates. So that is an option we're potentially looking at. The other issue, of course, and again, I'll feed this into the meetings, is that's fine, but the discussion we've just had for the last half hour now is we don't exactly know yet what we will be collecting separately from and separating out. So again, it's understanding what infrastructure is needed in the ground. But there's ways to do that. There's ways around that in terms of future-proofing it. But we'll bring those options certainly back to you and involve planners in that.
I'll bring in Councillor Charlwood now before I go on.
Sorry, I just had a thought about, elderly people, disabled people, those sorts of that's hard. When people grow older in a house and become disabled once they've already moved in, so that's just tricky. Whether there's options that we could look at as to sharing the bins that you already have with different collections. So if you have 2 wheelie bins and you have 4 collections for different things, could you use 2 bins for different reasons? Does that make sense? So you only have 2 bins, but use them for 4 things. Does that make sense? Sort of? No? Yeah? Yeah. If you have recycling one week, the next week you could have it as food waste, for example.
Yeah, all those types of models. Again, we did visit those, a myriad of models 3 or 4 years ago, I think, when we came to Scrutiny on those different models, those different options that we did with a company called Unomia. But we can revisit that and bring those back to you. As this kind of the discussion we started to get into now, everything has its pros and cons, and that's a good point, Councillor Charlwood, around the scheme that potentially could be done where you have a more communal, built in the ground based way of getting rid of your waste. Exactly right. Well, what happens with people that we currently call assisted collections, free wheel outs? That would we still then need to provide them with the bin and go and collect their bin anyway, and then, as you say, as people get old and in an estate, what happens to them? So that's why I think it is a really useful place to come and have some of those discussions with yourselves and work through the pros and cons and decide on what's best for Leeds, certainly.
Yeah. The other one following on from that is working with our highways colleagues. Because if we're going down the climate change way that we appear to be going down, then people are not going to be driving their cars in and out of the city, which means they're going to be parking them outside of their houses during the day when the refuse vehicles, and there's already problems in getting the refuse vehicles in and up streets. How are we going to keep highways involved in any new proposals? Because again, if you've got, another councillor from Kirkstall brought it to my attention the last time we were inquiring that in her ward, there was a problem with bins being left on the pavements. You know, so in other words, if you've got, say, 2 different collections occurring on one day, which has happened in some locations, you know, you could have a heck of a lot of bins sitting on a pavement, which was then causing problems from a disability point of view. So have you got things in mind as to how that can be resolved? Or is that something that we need to put into the terms of reference to look into?
My own view would be, I suppose it depends on what you as members want from the terms of reference of the inquiry, what you want the inquiry to focus on. If the inquiry focus, which was my understanding that was the main purpose of the inquiry, is to focus on future recycling options and how the service could, the options that could be brought forward and all the issues we've just discussed around that, the pros and cons, then part of that consideration to me would be in the options that you would have a view on would be the impact on the paths and streets. So if an option comes forward that requires 4 or 5 bins, then there's going to be more likelihood that that's going to cause more disruption of the kind that you've just described. So that would be, I assume, would be the discussion and the feedback and the debate that would happen at that part of the scrutiny discussion. So I would suggest that is just part of the focus and discussion of the options that are brought forward, rather than it necessarily being a specific separate thing. It needs to be part of the overall considerations. Something that Councillor Richardson discussed a number of times around the obstructions caused on pathways now. Never mind if there were more bins. So that'd be my view.
Yep, that's fine. The next one is on housing. We did start paying some landlords, and the council did themselves, to clear bin yards, but there was never sufficient funding to actually do all the bin yards we've got in this city. How do we keep housing involved with this? Because in your ward, they did a lot of good work in terms of clearing the bin yards, which has transformed the areas, absolutely transformed the areas. But there are other parts where the bin yards haven't yet been cleared out to the same degree. So for our scrutiny inquiry, how do we get housing involved to make sure that they start putting money in their budget to help the landlords? Some landlords will be willing to do it if they got maybe a 70%, 60%, 50% grant. They'd be willing to do it. So we've got to make a decision as a council whether or not we would fund the extras to do it. How do we go about incorporating this into our inquiry if we get some of the services you've outlined?
Chair, I'd probably look at it a little bit of the other way around. I'd probably be saying that part of the discussion and inquiry, perhaps that we haven't mentioned actually so far, is about behaviour change and about how we engage and incentivise and motivate and bring our residents along with us to increase the recycling rates with any new offers that do come of how we will collect and help them recycle. And I think this, to me, falls in that really. It's around actually how housing and landlords and others take responsibility and ownership to help support their tenants, to educate them and to incentivise them and to work with them and raise that as a priority for themselves as landlords and to champion this really. I'd look at it more that way around myself, that within the inquiry we need to look at how we're involving people in this rather than just doing it to them.
Councillor Akhtar.
Chair, I'll go a bit further than what we just said. Rather than clearing the bin yards, I think we need to have some sort of plan, some of the target areas where, for example, those bin yards have been used as a flying tipping, shall we say, and those private lands are taking the biscuit of local communities, don't live in the area, but obviously don't take any responsibilities. And I think we need to find a solution where we need to secure some of those bin yards rather than having them open. So the also antisocial behavior, flying tipping, and the illegal activities that are taking place. So I think on the long term, Chair, I think how do we secure those bin yards is the big question.
I think it's right. So my final thing is, apart from DEFRA, what other external partners should we try and engage? In the past, we have engaged with RAP, but then we found out that they had a different view on recycling and it confused people with their messages that they were putting out because we used different colour bins and they had national campaigns telling you to put everything in one colour bin, and we used that colour bin for another purpose. So apart from DEFRA, what other external bodies should we try and engage with so that we can get them something in the diary quickly with them so that they can come along?
Chair, I'd like to see the Green Doctor, please, because I think it's a lot of this is about education as well.
Yeah.
So I think we need to educate people what you can recycle, what you can't recycle, the benefits of recycling, and that way, hopefully, you know, we can engage with school children, because if we teach them very young, they typically, you know, continue with those behaviours. So that's what I'd like to see. Thank you.
Yeah. So, John, is there any other external partners other than DEFRA? And do you have a specific contact in DEFRA that we could invite to come along? You know, we've had the Environment Agency in the past, for example. Is there anybody in DEFRA you can think of?
In terms of the DEFRA suggestion, I can certainly have a discussion with DEFRA through our intermediary that we discuss issues through. They do have a regional sort of representation that I can discuss whether they would like to be involved, certainly, and I can and then feed that back to you, Chair, in terms of the contacts and what response they get. I think in terms of any other organisations that might have be able to offer some expertise or potential resource in the future in engagement, the main organisation we work through third sector wise is Zero Waste Leeds, who are, I think, have a reasonably good reputation across the city in terms of their engagement. Have helped us throughout the pandemic in terms of trying to get some messages across in a non-council way to people, that a bit of a third sector intermediary really. So they might be quite useful to involve. Would be my suggestion.
Okay. All right. Anybody get any other questions or suggestions or enhancements they want to make to the terms of reference? If not, right. So how we'll move this forward is we will have a working group meeting where we will have a chance to look back at the base and try and develop a baseline as to where we are. So that's in terms of looking at the volumes that were pre-COVID and the volumes we've got just now, and where we think the volumes might be coming up once we've come out of not that I don't think we'll ever get the far out of COVID totally, but a degree of normality, whatever the new norm is, let's put it that way. I think we need to look and try and assess or try and get a feeling for what the new norm is and what impact that would have on your ability to deliver the service. And if we've then got service enhancements on top of that, that's going to increase the amount of waste arisings even more. Because again, glass, I have large glass bins, as you know, in my ward. You know, would you still keep those? Would some of the banks, the bottle banks, still be in existence? Because again, they are sometimes a vital service, albeit, you know, that some pubs and clubs can use as a result of it. And it's a quid pro quo because we've given them they've given us the location and we can then let them use our bottle banks. So we need to, all these things I think are vitally important in terms of whatever way forward, because we've fought hard on some supermarkets to get them to allow us to go on there. And it'd be a pity if we lost the site, if you see what I mean, because we've introduced a service. A lot depends on who delivers the service as well. But so in that case, are we happy then to approve the terms as set out and amended, and we will, the first one we'll have is a working group on the current performance, and then we'll get dates in the diaries for any other working groups and for any formal meetings we'll be using through these meetings. We need to nominate 2 people to go on the Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board. Councillor Howley has volunteered. Are you wanting to go in as well, Councillor Reagan? That's fine. Can we stretch it to 3 so that I can come along? Right, fine, good. That's fine. And have you nominated your 2 people yet? That are, or 3, 2 or 3 that are coming onto our group?
Yes, so it'll be myself, Councillor Chapman, and probably Councillor Firth, if he's keen.
That's fine, thank you. Now, Councillor Chapman has written to me asking for an inquiry on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group on the impact of the waste, the current performance of the waste strategy. I have said at this stage, no, because we will have this working group session instead. So do I have your support that that's the best way of dealing with that particular one? Okay, good. And presumably you're happy as well that that's the way that it's going to be dealt with. Yep, good, that's fine. Right, in that case, thank you very much. I don't think there's anything out of bed I've forgotten. As is my want on occasions. So thank you very much for coming on today. Is there anything you want to say in conclusion, Councillor Rafiq? You've heard what's been said. Is there anything you want to say as closing comments?
No, I think just about, everything's been covered. I'm just I think which we've touched on towards the end is, I think unless we change our mentality around recycling, no matter what infrastructure we put in place, we're not going to achieve the target. So I think there's got to be both locally and nationally, there's got to be a debate, a big kind of focus point for public to kind of think about what they could do. Until that happens, I don't think we're going to go where we want to be.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. If we can now move on to item 10, Becky.
It's just to note the work programme that's reflective of the various requests that have come through the consultative meetings recently, and if there is anything else members want to build into that work programme, if they could indicate now, that would be lovely.
Yeah, and also to formally put on the record what we discussed in the private meeting is that our first budget meeting will be in December. So that's the first time we'll be discussing the budget will be in December. There was an idea that we'd be meeting beforehand, but there were, I'm not meaning this disrespectfully, but there wasn't much on the exec board coming forward with proposals yesterday. So there didn't seem much point in having a meeting just for the sake of it. So we'll be, the major items will be coming forward in November. I think it's November and December's, unless of course Councillor Rafiq is wanting to give us any of his secrets. No, that's okay. I didn't think you would. So, okay. So the next meeting is on the 21st of October, pre-meeting at 10 o'clock, starting at 10:30. And the other thing was that the November meeting will be a virtual meeting as well. Okay, thank you very much for your time and effort, and thank you for coming along, and hopefully we can get the site visit issue sorted out by the next time we meet.